Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Clifford Playground Improvements Project. This is our third community meeting. We are also going to be sharing the same information on Saturday, January 20th at 10 a.m. in person at 1010 Mass Ave. Next slide, please. I want to thank all of you guys for coming tonight and to make sure that you know that this meeting is being recorded. We know that meetings can be hard and not all times and formats are convenient for park users. That's why for each of the different meetings where we've had and will continue having for Clifford, we're going to have them in two different formats at two different times. Each of the meetings are going to share the same content and we'll be gathering the same types of feedback from the community. We're on Zoom tonight, and like I was saying, we'll have an in-person meeting on January 20th at 10 a.m. at 1010 Mass Ave. Even with offering multiple formats, locations, and times, we know that there still may be people who can't join us. And if you have any friends or neighbors who are not able to join us, please share what you learn or direct people to our project website for them to view the recordings and the presentation, which we'll be posting on here in about a week. People are also free to reach out to me directly via email, and in a few minutes, I'll put the project website and my email address in the chat for everyone. We want to make sure that this conversation feels really accessible to everybody, because that's why we're here. We want to hear your feedback, and we want to make sure everybody is respectful and mindful of others' times so that everybody has an opportunity to participate. Once you've submitted a question, please wait until others have had the opportunity to ask a question before submitting another one. And if you'd prefer, like I said, you're always welcome to set up a conversation with me and can contact me through my email. Next slide, please. We want to hear your thoughts. Like I said, that is why we're here tonight. There are several ways you can engage with us. We've got a lot of information to share tonight, and we do want to make sure that we're not just sitting here just talking at you, and we want to hear from you. So what we're going to do is we're going to break up the presentation a little throughout and talk about park area by park area as we go. And then we're going to have some places that we want to get your feedback via chat or a chance to unmute for a longer conversation depending on the topic. And then at the end of the presentation, we're going to open it back up for more general discussion about the park or to go back to any of the previous topics from earlier in the meeting. And, as always, if a question pops up in your head during the meeting, just feel free to add it to the chat and we can try to help you out there. Let's see. Okay, so the agenda. So we're going to do introductions and a quick project overview, and then I'll do, the team's going to talk a little bit about, what we shared in the first two meetings and a summary of what we heard from the community. But we're going to spend the majority of the time tonight talking about specific details about the design of certain areas of the park. Next slide, please. So as we're looking at this slide, I just want to make sure that people are aware that Boston Parks isn't working on this project alone, and we have a huge team from the city of Boston that's working on us with that renovation. And we know that there's a lot going on and that there are many other departments who are playing big roles in and around Clifford Park. And these are just a few of the individuals and departments that are working on it. But we do tonight have Brian from the city's critical response team who's here with us, and I'm going to hand it over to him for a 1 minute, quick update about work that's been happening at Mass and Cass. So if we could swap over that slide for Brian, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me join tonight. Incredibly excited about this project and seeing this park being revitalized. I'm just going to share a quick PowerPoint with you all. Bear with me, I am a social worker. I'm not the best at tech. I don't know. Did that work for you all? No.
We can help talk you through it though.
Okay.
So down at the bottom, there should be a green share screen with a rectangle with an up arrow on it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you click that,
yep.
You should be able to hopefully see a window that has your slideshow in it. And pick one from the group and then click that and then click share. Once you pick one of the windows, then the share button should turn blue.
I am so sorry, you all. It is It's not working like usual. Could I share the slides with people after if I'm having?
That would be, yeah, that would be great. If you just want to do a verbal update, that's fantastic, Brian.
Sure. Like Lauren said, my name's Brian Ferran. I am community liaison with the coordinated response team with the mayor's office. The coordinated response team, we really focus in unsheltered homelessness, mental health and addiction, and trying to do outreach and connect folks with services. We focus in connecting individuals to shelter and recovery pathways. We work to prevent encampments from forming anywhere in the city of Boston. We work with neighborhood groups and other stakeholders in promoting safety and healthy streets in Boston. Neighborhoods is really our priority. As many of you know, in November, there was a large intervention to close the encampment street that had been on Atkinson Street. It was months and months of preparation and planning with the city and a number of other partners, and we were able to place over 100 individuals in that intervention. In the time following the intervention, as many of you probably saw in the South End, Boston Police Department significantly increased their presence within the neighborhood, and they had temporarily stationed a mobile command center on Atkinson Street. Since the closure on Atkinson Street, Boston Police and the Boston Public Health Commission Recovery Services outreach team, they began doing co-response outreach alongside one another. That was a new initiative that's been going really well and something we're really excited about. It's really been a way to balance public safety and public health, making sure that any enforcement is balanced with service offerings and connecting folks to resources. Every day, members of my team, BPD, Boston EMS, and Recovery Services, we meet daily. Each morning, we discuss observations from the past day, identify locations for joint outreach with one another, and strategize on any emerging concerns, trends, or challenges. Our current priorities, first and foremost, is maintaining the safety commitment here in the Mass and Cass area, monitoring and addressing any new encampments that form across the city, sustaining the low threshold sites. The low threshold sites were such a critical element to the initiative. In November, those were 6 programs stood up in early 2022. We really want to focus now on improving permanent housing rates at the congregate sites and at our shelter programs, and finding ways to increase pathways to treatment. And finally, when we think of unsheltered homelessness, we have to think of the barriers individuals face and trying to find ways to remove those barriers to transform our shelters and meet the needs of individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness. In terms of what the on-the-ground work looks like, all the different outreach teams and our partners, we continue to meet every week to case conference individuals. We're coming across through outreach to identify people who might not have been placed or located during the Atkinson Street closure, and to make sure we're building a pool of individuals who are still in need of services so we can help refer them to whatever resources they might need. Moving forward, the city is really working to reformat our outreach to best meet the needs of individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness citywide. For a long time, I would say teams were really anchored to the Atkinson Street encampment area. And now we're being able to get back to being more citywide, more proactive throughout the surrounding neighborhoods. And then finally, we had a number of Mass and Cass specific working groups, and they're also shifting their lens to be more citywide as we move forward. I just want to share my contact info with you all. I'll put it in the chat. But our team, we operate, you can reach out to us directly. We have a shared email that goes to our daytime and our nighttime overnight outreach staff. We work through 311, but I'll just share all our info with you and happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate that. And thanks for putting your info in the chat. I know that will help a lot of folks. Katie, would you be willing to share the screen again? So our design team, I know you guys have seen them at our past meetings, is BSC Group. And tonight, Ricardo and Katie are going to be doing our presentation this evening, and we'll let them introduce themselves as they're speaking. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you guys an update on the schedule. As many of you know, we created the schedule together back in August based on starting construction sooner rather than later, but also with the understanding that we did not want the community process to be shortchanged. So the first park design meeting in October focused on the site analysis and listening to what the community thinks works and doesn't work and what the hopes are for the future of the park. At the second meeting, we shared several concepts and took feedback from the community on their feelings about those concepts and what items are priorities. The original schedule had this and Saturday's community meetings as our final community meeting, where we would come back to you and share the final design that we plan to move forward with. But after that second meeting and getting the feedback and after talking with many of the stakeholders, we realized that there are just so many specific details that we haven't been able to talk through with everybody yet. So we want to make sure that the community is part of helping us work out those details too. And in order to do that, we have decided to add one final meeting in late winter. And we're not anticipating that that adding that meeting is going to really delay the remainder of that schedule, but it is going to help us prioritize the needs of the community. And as soon as we have a date for that final meeting, we'll share it with you. So if you didn't get an email about this meeting directly from me, please feel free to reach out to me and make sure that I add you to my email list for that notification. We get asked a lot how design decisions are made, so I wanted to share this diagram with you. Some of the items that go into that decision-making is the community input, such as these meetings, coordination with local schools, emails that we get from people who find the videos and the presentations online, safety and regulatory guidelines, such as ADA, City of Boston priorities, and parks and recreation goals. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to BSC Group to get into what we've heard in the past.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. My name is Ricardo Ostrich. I'm the Director of Landscape Architecture and co-project manager for this project. And we're excited to show you the things we'll be discussing tonight in terms of the park elements, kind of recap where we've come from, what we've heard, and really get to the nitty-gritty of how we hope to kind of develop this park for you. I think just as a general recap, we felt that, I think there's a vision that I think we've learned over many meetings with you and conversations that we all want a resilient park that is utilized and well-loved and well-used by the community, and something that really harkens back to what it was in its heyday when all kinds of people used the park and all kinds of school groups and all sorts of folks really interacted with the park. And so our goal is to create or recreate that vision again. And so to do this, there's several important things that need to happen. We want a park that's open and visible. We want to increase the utilization of the park to have all kinds of sport teams, school kid activities, elder activities, things that can really be happening within the park at all hours. And so it really becomes once again a vibrant space. Because of climate change and our hot summers, we want to make the park actually resilient and something that's going to live for many, many years, and and support the changes in our climate. So we want to increase the tree canopy. We want to make it also better in terms of issues related to flooding and stormwater. So those are the things that are also going to need to take place. And finally, we want to make a place that's going to be vibrant for the neighborhood. And so that is our goal. And I think that we share those goals with you, and we think that we've learned from you in our conversations that we've had in the past. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to recap briefly the two concepts that we have three concepts, but the first two, just to sort of get to for folks who are joining us today, of sort of where we were. And so this concept was concept one, and this allows for softball and baseball and multi-use fields simultaneously. The playground is near the Mason School, which is, I think, very important. But one of the challenges with this concept was that the courts move from where they are right now near the Mason School. They kind of moved down over to kind of Shirley Street. And so they're not in an ideal location. This concept does include a new dog park where the tot lot is, and includes a much larger playground and a splash pad that we've heard from folks that they really want. The concept that you'll see in the blue line also has a walking and jogging path. And so this concept was good, but there's not enough number of courts. And so we felt that this concept doesn't really solve or really provide everything the community really wants. The next slide, please. And so concept 2, I think, was received well, and I think is becoming our preferred concept. And what's really great about this is that we have multiple fields that can happen not simultaneously, but it can happen very close to each other. This concept presupposes a artificial turf, but it includes sort of baseball and softball and a multi-use field that can be used for both soccer and football. It has a dog park. It has a much larger playground. It has really increased number of courts, both for tennis, for different kinds, half courts, and so all kinds of activities that the community wants. And it's really closer to Norfolk Ave, where we feel is kind of where the heart and activity of this community is. And in addition, over by Proctor, because of the incoming kind of Roxbury Charter School, this also provides a kind of plaza-like space that really separates the multi-use fields between the playground. And so I think this concept, I think, was well received by many folks in the community. And so I think this became our preferred concept. The next slide, please. And then sort of concept 3, again, this one limits the size of the courts, and they're spread out now. They're not together. They're closer to the Mass Ave side of the park. The dog park is still there, but it's a little smaller. And it really, the playground seems a little bit more pinched. We still have we still have a kind of a path, an exercise path around there. But I think that people felt that it didn't provide enough. And so I think one of the things that this concept was that it felt like it didn't give back enough opportunities for activities for the communities. And so those are the 3 concepts and the pros and cons. And mostly we'll be talking about sort of concept 2 and what we can think about how we program and develop that concept. So what we heard was that spectator sports can be really important. And so it's, they want spectator seating where, people can look at things, and they thought concept 1 did provide that. Concept 2 really became the one that prioritized the needs of the neighborhood and increased the number of courts. And so I think that was a really big plus. This concept, kind of course, as I had said, includes an artificial turf that really accommodates a greater use and activity for the different fields that we're providing. Concept 3, I think people liked it because it separated things, but they felt like the courts were too far away from the Mason School. So in general, we feel that, assuming that, that we're going to have permanent football goals, goalposts, that we want to include football and soccer or a multi-use activity. We want to incorporate shaded seating, as I mentioned, because of the issues of the hot summers. And we also want to integrate fitness equipment for all ages in the fitness loop. Next slide, please. So in addition to meeting with you folks in the community, we also reached out to the Mason School, and we have yet another session with the Mason School to discuss the playground, which my colleague Katie Kimman will talk about further in this presentation. But they felt like they would not only use the play equipment, but they wanted to use the basketball during recess. And so our idea was, how do we make those basketball courts more fun? They didn't want the walking loop to go through the playground, so we wanted to avoid that. But we wanted an integrated play structure that really incorporated and separated the activities of the 2 to 5 and the 5 to 8. Roxbury Prep, that's the school that's getting built on Proctor Street, really liked concept 2 as well, and they liked it with synthetic turf. They could see that they would utilize it for soccer and football. They would like to see scoreboards. They wouldn't typically use the courts. And since we were talking about kind of this preferred concept, then we had conversations with the Boston Public Schools, and they also preferred concept 2, but they also thought that we could make this really into a really kind of important center for school kid activities. And so to do that, we would have to incorporate MIAA requirements for figuring out where, not at Clifford Park, but in the vicinity, locate things like portable locker rooms, portable seat bleachers and restrooms, and they really wouldn't use the courts. And so those are the other folks that were part of the conversation, in addition to the conversations we had with the community. Next slide, please. So we're going to discuss now this long list of elements, and we're going to go through, and I will pause after site fencing to give folks a chance to make any comments. But we're going to look at circulation, fencing, seating and shade, courts, outdoor fitness equipment, playground equipment, the dog park, storage and portable facilities, and particularly storage is very important to the teams that use the park, and other amenities that can be incorporated. And finally, we'll hand it back to the Boston Parks team with Lauren and Kathy to discuss the field surfacing issues and options. Next slide, please. So, the first and foremost is really site circulation. And so after working with you and being on the site now for many, many months, we've determined that, there are important areas to access this site. And so those you see in the blue circles, and then there's secondary areas that you see as the sort of the pink circles. And so those are what we think are the important access points, but we want to make sure that we understand from you that, did we get this right? Do these dots or pink and blue circles make sense? In addition, I think everyone knows that we need to include access for emergency vehicles and for service vehicles. And so those are the round red kind of rings that you see on the circles. And so those describe basically where we would have vehicular access for emergency vehicles and for maintenance vehicles. We have the primary circulation path for the kind of health walk or the jogging trail. And then there's a secondary circulation path in yellow. And the next slide. As part of kind of the entryways, we wanted to actually sort of talk to you about, what kind of gateways would you like? Is there a preferred type? Is there something that you would like? Is it colorful? Does it incorporate kind of children's kind of drawings? For example, on Ryan Playground, the kids made these little tiles and those were incorporated. Is it a big playful thing like the playground you see on with that entrance at the top right-hand side? Is it something simpler that you see on the left? And then in the walking loop, could we incorporate kind of activities, not only for adults with exercise equipment, but also kind of mathematics games or something that would really be a walking loop that would provide exercise, but also provide educational opportunities for kids if they're walking with their parents. And so, any kinds of things that you think would be helpful, or you think that you would like to see as your primary gateway, your secondary gateway, and what we could do to make that walking loop fun for everyone of all ages. Next slide.
Thanks, Ricardo. And I think one of the things that we'd like to hear is if people in the chat would like to put into the chat if you think some kind of a gateway, some kind of an entry feature like this is something you're interested in at Clifford. We'd love to hear that in the chat.
Yes, and I'm going to talk about fencing next, and there's a bunch of different options. Then we're going to stop and we can take questions. But one of the things I mentioned also was this sort of plaza that's going to be between the play equipment and the sports fields in option 2. And so here are some images of different kinds of plaza spaces that we would envision. So it would be something that would kind of be appealing both for high school students, but also for community members, for folks to have lunch. We understand people come and have lunch there in the summertime, and also for the kids from the Mason School and from the pool, or folks from the community. So we wanted to really provide a variety of different kinds of spaces, and these are the kind of amenities that we would envision in that plaza space that you'll see in our preferred scheme and plan that'll be at the end of this presentation. The next slide, please.
And Ricardo, before we jump in on fencing, one of the things that I just want to point out before we look at these is fencing is something that we have heard a lot about in the community meetings in terms of questions of, where are the gates going to be? Is it going to be closed off? What type of fencing would it be? And because it's a public park, we don't lock the park, but we, do want to hear people's thoughts on fencing. And there are a few options because each different individual sport, like basketball needs a different type of fencing than we would need around the playground. So Ricardo is going to talk through some of those, but because fencing and security have been a big talking point at our meetings, we did want to spend some time looking at this and to get your take on any of these. So if we could maybe, Ricardo, go through each of them kind of
Yep.
quickly with the overview, and then we could get some takes from folks.
Exactly. Thank you, Lauren. Yes, and so this is a fencing option one. And so you see the legend on the top right-hand side. And so there's sort of existing fencing, there's the 4-foot high fence, there's ball netting, which comes into play along the sports fields, along the baseball fields. There's the kind of a 6 to 10-foot high fencing. And so those are going to come into play. And so in this option, I think what we wanted to focus on was we wanted to reduce the fencing, around to the point that we wanted to make the park feel more welcoming. So this, is trying to create a more welcoming environment, something that feels a little bit more open to the community. But we'd also refurbish existing fencing. So the area by the dog park, that's really beautiful old-fashioned fence, and we would refurbish that. But in this scheme, the idea is that we wouldn't put a fence on the edge of Proctor and Norfolk and then put another fence around the playground. We wanted to make it so that once you entered the threshold of the park, you could sort of easily get to the playground, to the splash pad. Obviously, there's fencing around the courts, and there's fencing around the sports field. But we wanted to keep it as open as possible so that sort of folks from the community could access the different park elements within Clifford. Next slide, please. And in this fencing, we have more perimeter fencing to limit access. And so we have the purple shows the existing fence, which would be refurbished, but we'd also have fencing around the playground. We would also have fencing around the sports fields, fencing around the courts. Obviously, the dog park would have fencing to have both, for the larger dogs and the smaller dogs. And so this scheme has kind of more fencing. And I think the other thing the scheme does is at the bottom right-hand side, we're utilizing ball netting and just a lower fence, a 4-foot high fence, because we didn't want to have that feel pinched at that point, that it feels like an important juncture in the park. And so in this scheme, we have kind of perimeter fencing and interior fencing, but interior fencing around specific elements, but two different types, the ball netting and the lower fence. And then the third option, in this option, we kind of, again, look at reducing the fencing at the perimeter, but really fencing in then the specific elements within the park. And so you have the playground is fenced in, the sports fields are fenced in, and what's done with the sports field is we've utilized both the 4-foot high fencing, but also the 10-foot high fencing, so that we don't rely on netting, but just fencing and you'll see an image of this, to really control where the ball goes, and is a kind of a fairly durable thing, so that the sports fields are on their own, the bleachers are kind of on their own, the dog park is on its own, and the tennis courts are also fenced off on their own. So there's one that's sort of fairly open, but doesn't have double fencing. That's option one. Option two has more of the kind of exterior fencing and internal fencing, and the third one is more internal fencing. And so here are examples. On the right-hand side is the fencing that we would refurbish. At Roberts Field, you see above the kind of fencing around the courts that can be multi-use. So it's a basketball court, but it could also be soccer. And then also at Roberts Field, you see the kind of high fencing that we would have rather than netting at the baseball diamonds, if that was what people wanted. Obviously, the dog park and stuff would have their fencing, and there's also looking at different kinds of styles of fencing. And I think let's go to the next slide. I think we're going to stop.
I think we're going to pause for a minute, and I'd love to hear some feedback from folks about those different approaches to fencing, to whether we'd like a perimeter fence around the outside, whether something that feels more open and welcoming, but has each individual element fenced. So if anybody would love to give us their thoughts on that, you could put it in the chat. You can raise your hand. We can unmute you, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Joanne, let's see. Are you able to unmute, Joanne?
Yes,
Hi
ma'am. Good
there, how
evening,
are
everybody.
you?
Good. How's everybody doing? Appreciate you hosting this call for us all. I think I've had a very passionate stance on fencing overall.
Exactly.
I do see the value in fencing off clearly the areas where balls are moving, the tennis courts, basketball courts. I also see value in fencing off the playground for the students that are coming in. I'm opposed to high fences, definitely around the exterior. I think I always highlight one of the things that's nice about this park is how it is open and accessible. It feels like it's inviting for the community. There might be areas like there's already the existing fence on Proctor Street, and those like block off the business side, and that's something that I've brought up as well in the past. But I do like the fact that the community side is open and accessible. So I would, vote for something that's either the 4-foot fences if necessary in some places, but really just kind of open concept around and fencing off those areas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate that. And I know that's why we wanted to talk about it, because I know it's come up a lot at our other meetings. And again, we'll talk about this again on Saturday as well in person and get some more feedback then too. Is there anybody tonight that wants to also share their thoughts on the fencing? Okay, well, I think we might jump to the next thing we're going to talk about. And if anybody has any thoughts about fencing, you can pop it into the chat, and we can also jump back to it later in the presentation too.
There was a question from Rocco about the nearest T stop. So I can answer that. So the nearest T stop is the commuter rail stop. That's Newmarket. So that's that's off the plan, but that's kind of to about to the right of the plan. So that's the Newmarket commuter rail public transportation stop.
And then there's several bus stops as well, right in front of 1010 Mass Ave as well.
Here is a scheme where we just show all kinds of options for seating. And we want to ask, there's bench seating, there's tables and chair seating, there's bleacher seatings. And so I want people just to look at all these dots. I want to go through, Katie, if it's okay, through the different kinds of seating so people get an understanding of them. We go back to the seating slide just so people can sort of take it in. But the idea here is that, we're going to use mostly city standard seating, but we're going to utilize pops of color, and we may have some special elements, like, for example, the benches on the top right-hand side, where we've incorporated the very top image on the right is from Malcolm X Park, and that incorporates tiles that were designed by local kids, but there's also other ways of making the benches colorful. Here there's to the left, you see a bench that is really comfortable. It's good for elders because there's hand things that they can hold on to, but it also helps people, and it kind of makes it welcoming, but doesn't make it so that, people can kind of just hang out everywhere. And then you see some benches, examples of kind of little tables and benches that can incorporate games. It could also be incorporated. It can be some of these can be modified for handicap accessibility. So I think that those are several options for seating. The next slide, please. And then with seating comes the issue of shading. So the slide on the left-hand side again is at Malcolm X Park, and so we like that image because I think it shows a kind of a very friendly kind of arrangement. It is shaded, but it's a shade with a porous shade so that it'll keep the sun out, but it won't keep the rain out. And so here's an example on the top right-hand side, and there's another example of those kinds of seating with shade. So on a hot sunny day, you can enjoy your lunch or your food, or hang out with your kids and not be overly hot. Next slide, please. And in terms of shading, I think there's different kinds of things that we can do to provide shading, but also make it porous. So the shading on the top left-hand side could be kind of, again, like a mesh-like shading and could incorporate these sorts of seats. I think there's a really playful shading, and I could envision this near the playground that has sort of holes punched through that I think kids would really enjoy. And then this is another kind of shading that's fairly open, but it's playful and colorful and kind of, again, lets the light through, but gives you just enough shade on those hot summer days for you to kind of really be able to enjoy it. I think that might be all our seating slide, but I just wanted to kind of just go back. And so have people take a look at it, get a sense of, where we propose to have the bleachers, where we're thinking of tables and chairs, and, are there too many chairs? Are there not enough? Does this seem okay? And again, you'll notice that the chairs are really kind of focused on the area by kind of Norfolk Ave, and then there's some benches and smaller seating by the dog park. And so there's a variety of options, but it'd be good to just get a sense from folks of what they felt like about that. I think we could continue.
Just to jump in on that really quickly, Ricardo. So one of the things that we heard before was that people really liked at Malcolm X Park and at Garvey, how there were sort of small groups of seating around the park instead of large gathering spaces. That's because the concern was parties and other things. So this is really trying to kind of spread that out a little bit based on those comments. So again, now that you've sort of seen how this could play out based on those comments, let us know if that seems to make sense, if you feel like there's still too much seating. Those are the kind of comments that would be really helpful in the chat.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, this slide deck will be posted on the city website. So you will see this, you can go back to the slide deck if you need to leave. Okay, next slide. Back sports courts, next slide. Okay, and so we just wanted to highlight where the sports courts were. I think this is why this became such a popular scheme or idea, was because really the sports courts were going to be something that both, the kids from the Mason School could utilize, and the kids from the Roxbury prep school could also utilize, but the community could utilize as well. We have people who, I've seen dog walkers there, I've seen all kinds of folks there. So I think that it can be a great kind of thing, and they can be painted and kind of and optimized in ways that make them really kind of inviting spaces. And so next slide, please. What kind of striping do folks want? You see the kind of very playful striping on the top left-hand side, but there's other kinds of striping for additional sports and tennis. Do we need scoreboards? What kind of storage? What might we want here? Next slide, please. And then kind of different painted court activities. I think that, we have a slide later on that shows one of my colleagues doing hopscotch, but, kids want to come out, they want to draw, they want to, play in the ground. And so this is ways of doing something that is very playful and simple, but really kind of can really activate the space. Next slide. And I mentioned the outdoor fitness component. And so I think it's important to think about this park, not just for a certain group of people, but really the entire age group. So it's both for older folks and for young toddlers and for teenagers. And so the outdoor fitness equipment I was really impressed with was you see the ones in the middle that are the stairs, and these are for our elders who kind of maybe need to exercise and use the stairs and give them confidence in walking up and down stairs, because as they become older, that becomes a real issue. Or the terrain model, which you see on the top left-hand side. And then for younger folks, there's all kinds of things like the different bars and exercise things that you see. And these could be deployed along that walking loop so that, really it's something that appeals to everyone of every age. And I think that's something that's our goal. Next slide.
And I think we'd love to hear in the chat, are there specific activities that you really want to make sure that, out of the different exercise activities that are available, do you really want, push-up bars or some sort of, climbing wall, or these are hurdles? Maybe the sports teams would be interested in having those, balance beams, other things like that. So if there's some sort of activity that you really want selected, we'd love to hear that specifically.
Yeah.
And the next slide has more examples of that. So there's even, like this really interesting kind of climbing wall, and just additional visualizations of folks using different type push-up bars and balance beams. So we'd love to hear that either in the discussion later or in the chat if there's something that you think you can use.
And the next slide, I think. And then, of course, the park's going to have amenities that are really standard now in all City of Boston parks. And so they'll have trash receptacles, the bike racks, they have water bottle stations. They're going to be included also, and these are all from Boston Parks, these images. Police call boxes. The dog park is going to be using a granular material, again, separated out for both kind of big dogs and small dogs. And where we've located the dog park is in a position, a place that's really with lots of good tree canopy. So we won't be needing a shade structure. And finally, I mentioned the hopscotch, and there's my colleague on the hopscotch enjoying that. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Ricardo, just to jump
Yep.
back, I just want to clarify one thing. Police call boxes are not standard in every single one of our Boston parks, but it is something that we have discussed call boxes and security cameras, which are currently at Clifford for this park. But that was request from the community. But I just wanted to clarify that the call boxes are not a city Parks Department standard.
I appreciate that. Sorry, Lauren. Thank you for that. I've just seen a bunch everywhere, so now I'm wondering whether they were, but now I know. Thank you, but they will be here. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to my co-project manager, Katie Kimmon. So Katie, please.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Keeman, and I work in BSC's Climate Resilience Group. So we are working to engage, especially the Mason School students, to hear what they want in the playground, but we also want to hear from community members and children and families in the neighborhood as well about what they want to see at the playground. So I'll just put in an additional plug that there is a survey that's posted on the project website in multiple languages, and we have one that is specific to the playground, and we'd love to get input. So please share that link. Please fill out the survey yourself if you haven't, because we definitely want to hear from you. And these are just some representative images of things that we'll be talking about with the Mason School students, but we also welcome feedback tonight and also at Saturday's in-person meeting. But, you know, we're interested in both thinking about the playground for the 2 to 5 year olds and then also the older kids, and thinking about what types of structure, what style of structure. So, you know, there are some structures that are more focused on like netting and climbing. There are some that are more imaginative, and they might look like, you know, a fire truck or a spaceship or something. There are others that, you know, you can see in this top right picture have more like towers and other things for kind of climbing, and they feel like playhouses. And so really getting a sense both of style and colors and activities that kids in the neighborhood are interested in having. And similarly for older kids, you know, a little bit bigger and more things if they're looking for something that's more modern or traditional. So hearing from them on that. We also want to talk about specific elements. What are the activities that they want to do? Currently, we're thinking about building into the playground some, you know, changes in elevation so that they can kind of climb up a hill and slide back down it. We're interested in, you know, spinning activities and playground equipment that's accessible and inclusive for all the kids in the neighborhood. What kind of climbing do they want to do? Do they want big nets? Do they want, you know, boulders to climb on? Do they want monkey bars and other things? And similarly, you know, is there imaginative play activities? We've heard at our second community meeting that someone wanted a place to sit and do crafts with their friends. And so are there kind of little table areas or something that can be incorporated? And also different types of swings. So we welcome your input this evening, but also want to encourage you, if you, you know, have someone who's going to be using this playground, to please, you know, respond to our survey or contact Lauren or otherwise let us know what you want to see there. And I'll also just mention, Ricardo also mentioned the dog park. But, you know, as he said, you know, we're thinking about having separate spaces for smaller dogs and larger dogs, thinking about the materials and, you know, what's kind of comfortable for the dogs as they move around, incorporating benches for their human friends to use while they're there. And, you know, either boulders or other structures for them to kind of jump on and climb and kind of get some types of different physical activity. Our plan is looking at sort of these shorter fences in the area to kind of go with some of the openness and visibility in the park. Ricardo, do you want to jump back into this, or do you want me to?
You can just go ahead and.
Okay, I'll keep going then.
Oh, Katie, I was going to jump in here if that's
Oh,
okay.
all right,
great.
okay.
Perfect.
Go
Okay.
ahead, Lauren, go ahead.
Thanks. I was just going to jump in once we started getting into some of the fields and athletics stuff. So we've talked about the need for formalized storage areas as well as designated areas for portable toilets that a lot of the leagues bring in. So this diagram is showing the areas that we're looking to propose for these items. And especially from our sports teams, we really want to hear if these are good locations or if there are different locations that you think could work better. And then, so this is talking about, maybe over by the base, there could be some areas where some of the trailer or that the containers that come in could be, there would be paved pad for those to go on so that it doesn't get as damaged and it doesn't damage the park as much whenever trailers and temporary facilities are brought in and out. We do have some photos on the next slide that show what some of these things look like or could look like. And so you can also see sort of an enclosure for porta potties so that, again, they have a place to go, because we've heard at Clifford, they kind of just get put, any which way around the park. They get damaged, they get knocked over. There's a way to secure them in terms of this being a facility that that porta potty could come in and out of. We also have looked at the potential, in addition to the larger containers that are sometimes out there, to have some smaller containers potentially at the courts. If with courts having two tennis courts, Tenacity could potentially use it. And I know they tend to have containers. Maybe it's something that the Mason School would like to have something so they don't have to bring out so many play elements when they come out. So these are just some examples of how that would work. And I know this was one of the questions Rocco had. This is part of what we were talking about in terms of portable amenities, but we'll talk about a little bit more on the next slide. Oh, maybe not. Sorry, this is the athletic seating. So on the slide after this. So this is just giving examples of what some of that seating could look like in terms of the bleachers and in terms of shaded dugouts and shaded player areas. Is something that, especially with the heat, we really want to make sure that we can try to keep our kids cooler. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the potential additional athletic amenities. So as part of the field design, we're also thinking about possible future needs of the park, not just our current needs. And it's something that we do when we design any of our parks, is think about the current needs and the needs that we hear that could happen in the future. So if football games are played here at Clifford, there may be a need for locker room space or additional restroom facilities. And based on the recreational activities that are in the park that we've already discussed, we really don't feel like those facilities could be accommodated within the park itself, but they might be accommodated on adjacent city-owned property, such as, there's the Mason Pool, there's, the BPRD, the Boston Parks building that is on Magazine Street that's adjacent, as well as possible temporary tents that could be brought in on that parking lot on Magazine Street and Proctor Street as well. And so we also would have bleachers as part of this current scope, with the ability to add more seating in the future if needed. And the slide before had some of those pictures of what those could look like. Next slide, please. So as we've gathered information and the priorities from the community, we've developed a plan that you've seen in the background of each of these diagrams that we've talked about tonight. And these plans have shown how the areas surrounding the field have been designed to accommodate all of the requests from the community and needs of the park users, such as the courts doubling in quantity and shifting towards the neighborhood, as well as the Mason School and Roxbury Prep, which will better address the needs of the school students and also the residents. We're also increasing the size of the playground and adding a separate water play area, and swapping the use of the playground along Mass Ave to become a designated dog area. A walking loop like Ricardo talked about with exercise equipment around the exterior of the field space. And also paying attention to the existing vegetation while we're looking at how all of these fit, because we don't want to take out existing trees so that everything fits into that existing space. So what we wanted to focus on for the rest of the meeting tonight is the field itself. So we're going to show you guys several concepts of how that field area can be designed and which sports can be accommodated with each of the concepts. And then we really want to hear your feedback about priorities before that final decision is made. And then once we hear those thoughts, we'll finalize the design and we'll be able to come back to a meeting in late February or early March to share that final design. So then we can see how all of these pieces that we've talked about around the outside, finishing those details. And then once we figure out what's going to happen in the field, then we can put all of it together. So we really do want to hear tonight about these concepts for the field. So like Ricardo said, this is based off of concept 2. This was our, basis of design for these concepts from that concept 2 from our last meeting that really sort of positioned a lot of those exterior elements around the field. So this concept 1 would be artificial turf. This concept would have to be artificial turf to allow all of the sports to be accommodated that were requested by the community. So this concept would accommodate baseball, softball, little league, football, and full-size soccer. So that would allow us to do all of those things. And the reason that this concept would need to be artificial turf to have all of those sports is that the infield of the baseball, if you can see, overlaps with soccer and football. And the reason that's a problem with a natural grass turf is that because you've got clay and then grass, you have a tripping hazard on that seam that would be in the middle of the football field and the soccer field, or on the edge of that football field and soccer field. So with artificial turf, there's a seamless condition at the edge of the baseball infield. That being said, the city does have a strong preference for natural grass fields, but we also understand that with a natural grass field in this location, we would not be able to accommodate all of the sports that were requested from the community. But we did want to share a concept that would allow for all of those requested uses. Next slide, please. So this is looking at what a concept would look like with natural turf. So this would be allowing to have softball, football, and baseball, but instead of a full-size soccer, high school size soccer, we would only be able to accommodate a U12 soccer. And that's because soccer is wider than a football field. So here you can see the edge of the blue rectangle at the bottom is just at the edge of the infield of baseball. So that with football would be okay, but there's a line just below that that is where soccer would go, and that would overlap with the infield. Therefore, it would be an unsafe condition for a full-size soccer in this option. Next slide, please. So this concept says, let's look at it in a different way and let's see what else we can do. So this says we wouldn't be able to have baseball. And the reason we wouldn't be able to have baseball is because it's that baseball infield that overlaps. So we could do 2 softball fields here and full-size football and full-size soccer. We know that the base is right next door, so that's certainly not, ideal for them for any, but this is an option. And so we wanted to show what this option was. A fourth concept for natural turf would be no soccer and no softball. So we could do it this direction where the football is turned and we have football and baseball. The reason we couldn't have soccer here is that it's wider and there's a pinch point down by the base at the bottom right corner of the football field. And that would not allow us to have the exercise walking loop around the outside of the field. And concept 5 for natural turf would be no soccer and no football, which is an option. And we would have baseball and softball at the same time. So those are our looking at what the options could be. And, after sharing these concepts with you, we really want to take the opportunity to hear any thoughts and preferences of the community and park users, specifically on the points of artificial turf versus natural turf. And also, if natural turf is desired by the community, we want to take this opportunity today to also prioritize together which sports would be accommodated at Clifford and which ones wouldn't. So with that, I do want to just open it up for people who want to give us their thoughts. Feel free to do that in the chat or raise your hand. And we can go back and look at each of these concepts if people want to talk through them. And Kathy, if you want to add anything, please feel free.
Good evening. How are you today? This is Steph Lewis of the base here.
Thanks, Jeff.
How's everybody doing? I apologize, just logged in, so I didn't get to see sort of all the concepts. So I was just curious if that would be able to go in the chat.
We
But
can flip back to them real quick if you want us to. This is an
Oh,
important part
please.
of this meeting, absolutely. So what we were saying, Steph, is that what we looked at the last meeting, if you remember, we had those 3 concepts and people really gravitated towards the second one because it had a lot of benefits for the community, especially in terms of getting a lot of the courts in the playground closer to the neighborhood and the schools. But what that means is once a lot of those other things were locked around the field area, we had sort of a field area that we now need to figure out, right? So that concept, which is this one that we're seeing now, in order to fit every field sport that the community was interested in, it would need to be artificial turf because of the overlap with the baseball infield for safety purposes and tripping hazards. So what we looked at is this is very similar to what was shown at that second community meeting. And then there was a second concept, if we could flip through fairly quickly, Katie. So this one looked at what would our options be with our designated kind of field space for natural turf. So this was saying that we could do baseball, softball, football, and not a full-size soccer, not a full high school soccer, but we could do a U12 soccer. The next one said we could do no baseball, which I was saying because the base is not necessarily ideal, but we're showing all of the options and do 2 softball, football, and soccer. The next was natural turf with no soccer and no softball, but it would have baseball and football. And the reason it couldn't also have soccer is because of it's wider and there would be a pinch point down by the base in terms of the walking loop. And then the 5th concept is natural turf and no soccer and no football, but we would have baseball and softball. So we did want to just show all of these as options, knowing that we really do want the community to help us determine the material of the field as well as what sports are desired here too. Does that help with a quick overview stuff?
Yes, no, that's great. I mean, my biggest thing is, and I always lobby for, is what will get the most utilization, particularly on field space. Again, I'm sorry, I have a bias on when I'm talking about fields, but to lock in a particular design in which, one single permit will go out, it kind of gridlocks a lot of things, right? And so I just always challenge, what is the opportunities that multiple permits can be put out all at one moment, to get the best utilization of the fields. If we talk about, again, the bigger issues that have been discussed with Clifford Park has been, and within the neighborhood has been, the lack of activity with youth engagement in the area. So then to gridlock it with limited action, right, as opposed to completely looking to fully utilize it in different manners, has always been something that I'm just always going to stand by. And, one of the things I would always throw out and consider is if you look at the fields, particularly with the turf fields, baseball, softball, whichever way it goes, is there are always the opportunity to utilize artificial mounds, right? And so therefore it becomes totally open because the dimensions as far as angles is open, right? But if you have, as opposed to a dirt mound that's permanent and now things are in the way, if you have an artificial mound, which I know Madison was using at some point. I'm sure Avery can speak on that. But Madison was using, like, now you can look to utilize it where it's closer, where it's farther, where it's not there for softball. Now you just have one field that could be utilized in different types of manners, as opposed to having a permanent structure that's there that then limits, right? And again, as I'm thinking about constant openness and constant engagement, rather than having small things hinder what that engagement can be.
Thank you, Steph. I appreciate that. Avery, I think you're next.
Evening, everybody. Yeah, I mean, I think just in looking at the concepts, I understand the long-term environmental benefits of a natural surface, but I think in terms of just the practicality of knowing we live in New England, and I think knowing that we have a lot of different activities that occur, during the traditional season, during the out of season time, looking at the concept of this artificial surface, I think resonates just from an ability to have a confidence in the space. I think the pieces, and I know we touched on it earlier in the presentation, and some of the pieces that have come back becomes the use of the field, from a recreational standpoint, from a youth standpoint, to, maybe an interscholastic standpoint, to even the adult standpoint, how some of those pieces play out. The one thing I look at when you're playing like a soccer or a football, and just if it's possible, but thinking about like the benches situation and some of the other pieces that come with it, if those are all feasible on this artificial design, in terms of just, the safety and longevity of the field. I mean, I think there's some level of validity to it. I know Coach Zizzo raised that you can't really do multiple things at once on this field. And, I'm sure we've looked at all the different kind of designs and where you place things and things of that nature. But I think a surface that has some flexibility and ability to meet the need in March and April and, now May, we're still dealing with weather, is an important thing to consider.
Thank you, Avery. I appreciate that. Monica, I think you're next. Are you able to unmute?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So I think so I come into this looking at it from the parent perspective as a Pop Warner football player who has utilized Clifford Park as is, right? So I think that it's important in this design to consider definitely utilization of the people that are already using the space, right? Like, I don't want this design to result in displacing participants, right? So I definitely would be opposed to the concept that eliminates the football, and I think it was football and baseball being eliminated, because I just know as someone who actually uses this space that those are in fact the two sports that I see happen regularly. I love the idea of trying to have multiple activities be in the same space. However, I think that it's just really important that we recognize what's realistic, right? And I'm not sure what's happened in terms of engagement and asking the community what is currently being used for. And what the long-term vision is. But personally, my preference would be, I think it's concept 4. I think it's the natural turf with the no soccer and no softball. And that's only because I guess that's the limitations of the natural turf. and I'm not aware of any soccer or softball happening. Now, I know that you guys are engaging with the Mason and Roxbury Prep, and perhaps they have a different vision for the use of the space. But I just want to make sure that people who are actually using the space now aren't misplaced because of the design. Another thing that I would really strongly advocate for is making sure that it sounds like there are limitations in terms of locker rooms and storage and things like that. One of the challenges of the space right now, and given the location, is because there aren't designated places for equipment, there it's regularly being stolen, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I speak for the Bengals that resources are very limited, and when the kids have their equipment stolen, the coaches have to incur that cost, right? So I think that it's important, as we're considering the design, that we have something in mind in terms of storage, something in mind in terms of designated places for equipment. And then also just making sure that there is definitely a good amount of restrooms incorporated into this design, because as of right now, a lot of times we have to leave in order to use the bathroom. So I know that that's something that has been incorporated in some of the designs, but just making sure that it's in close proximity to the actual fields, I think would be helpful.
Thank you, Monica. I really appreciate all of that thoughtful input, especially as a parent who uses the field a lot. That's really great input. And I do just want to note, and I know Kathy mentioned it in the chat in response to Rocco, is that, you know, like a lot of our parks in for the city, that there aren't any restroom facilities that we're planning that would be permanent. The ones that we're looking at would be a more permanent location for the portable porta potties, so that they were in potentially better locations and easier to clean and maintain, and so that they had a much nicer space to be in, but they wouldn't be a permanent restroom facility. So I just wanted to clarify that. Rocco, I think you are next. Are you able to unmute?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Well, I just want to first say to Ms. Coleman, totally understand the anxiety of displacement. So I would never want that to happen to another team or another sport. But speaking of sports regarding natural turf, if the field is natural turf, would football still be allowed?
Yes, yeah, we were showing several of the options that would still have baseball, or sorry, would still have football. The only one that we showed that would not still have football would be, I think it was option 5. Was that right? Yep. So concept 5 was the only one that didn't have football. So we're still saying that on the other options we could do football.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Do you have a preference, Rocco? I'm just in terms of the artificial versus the natural turf while we've got you?
Well, no, our practice field and our game field is White Stadium, and they're bringing in the pro soccer team, and we're not allowed to touch the natural turf. They don't want us to destroy the field. So ideally, you know, I would love natural turf better than the artificial turf, but as Avery said, regarding confidence, it's nice having the artificial turf there on a regular basis, and we know it's going to be consistent. Because
Okay.
it's literally, I went 2 years without playing at Playstead and White Stadium because of flooding there.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful to know.
Thank you.
Steph.
Yep, I apologize. I wanted to just jump in with 2 more things. The first is, you know, again, as you're looking at natural turf versus artificial turf, you know, one of the things I do want to point out is that with natural turf, if you look, right, I mean, just as Avery mentioned, right, if you look at the weather that we're in, this field was actually just done over again less than 10 years ago. So if we go artificial turf, we're going to end up with the exact same response, which eventually becomes tax dollars. of us as residents. If you look at, again, all the fields that were done with artificial turf, we've all have gone back to them again to redo them. So sort of that answer is there in front of us of we'll be utilizing more tax dollars to do it again. Or if you look at some of the fields that have turf, the sustainability has been little to none. The second thing is, again, totally understand that this was the concept that was chosen. Now, this is where I'm going to speak a little bit selfishly. As a building owner, now I'm going to throw that out there, right? That's on this plot of land. If you look at where the softball and baseball fields are, I have deep concern for my windows, right? Because now those fields are directly at our building. So can I anticipate the city to be sort of, again, if there's damages, will the city be reimbursing me? You know, again, from a selfish standpoint, right now, I don't want to go back out there where we were talking about having some of the old concepts, having the fields farther out or out towards Proctor, right? Particularly with baseball. That was, you know, again, the last conversation we had. I know I left and then the conversation flipped from the last meeting upon my departure. But again, if you look at, so like a concept 4 that's right there, right? So concept, we're shifting. So, right, if you look at concept 4, that's right there, but then you take away girls softball, which has been utilized here for so long. And then again, the youth, because the one baseball field, if you look at that, particularly with natural turf, that means a permanent structure goes down. So that means any kid 12 and under will not be playing there. Again, so I it's just the clarity of the words. And I know there's the design team, but it's also, do you understand the sports that are actually happening on the designs that you're throwing out? So with this particular field, now any kid that's interested in baseball, 12 and under, won't be on Clifford Park because of this design. Any girl that's looking to utilize softball cannot use it because that's a baseball field that's too large as well. So you just only took out 2 major demographics that are out there. Yes, this kind of moves a little bit away from, you know, this particular concept gets away some of our building being hit, but again, it's still right there in the hype of it. One foul ball from a righty that hooks pretty strongly, that's our window.
Katie, could we jump back to the option or concept 1? And then could we also, after we do that, does concept 1
So if you look at
help with
concept,
that concern at all?
concept 1 is still outwards, but again, the difference, it's still there. It's still now, like, so if you look at field 4, a lefty hits a foul ball, that could be my window from a building perspective. But the difference, at least from utilization standpoint, is you now, if again, it being turf field, I know we're talking about one permitting again, and I'm sorry if I sound selfish with this, because of the size of the fields, you can now put 2 softball games and or 2 teams to be able to play that are 12 and under if there is no mound on field number 5, right? And that's where I'm talking about, that artificial mound that you could place and or remove. Because now, again, rather than, you know, if you have 2 teams of 15, 30 kids playing, you could have 60 kids utilizing this field under still one permit.
Yeah, Steph, I
Because
do just
if
want to,
football or soccer has it, it can't be utilized anyway. If baseball has it, then now you can maximize it. So again, I'm talking about maximization of the fields. But nonetheless, if you look at these designs, right? These designs, again, are prime territory for our buildings. Because again, if you look at Shirley Street right here, particularly on 4, that has more of a leeway. And then even on 5, more of a leeway from our side window to be able to be hit, right? And so that's a lot of money, honestly, that could be coming out on a weekly basis if need be.
Do we want to talk fences?
Yeah, can we
Yeah.
go back to that diagram,
Sure.
Katie?
I think the other thing while they're pulling that up, Steph, I do just want to note that we do have portable mounds at many fields, Madison Park, Poplar Playground, Roberts, that mound is portable. So they do exist in many of our field facilities. We tend to either leave them in place, as is the case at Roberts, that mound doesn't really get moved, or deploy them seasonally. Because they are quite heavy and challenging to move. It's not a 1-person thing that can be done, like, you know, grab, 5 kids and drag it out to the right spot. We do it seasonally. So there's just something to keep in mind that to change it,
And
hour by hour to
I'm aware that
softball
only
field.
where I push back is, do you have to go with that exact same one? Right. And
Well, yeah, I mean,
that's
we
what I'm
can
saying.
certainly get
There,
into
there
the,
are smaller ones. There are ones that can go. So what I'm saying is, if that's just status quo, then we're living on status quo here. Where I'm more so talking about is complete utilization from the community standpoint. Because, you know, as Monica mentioned, right, if there's the people that utilize it, I understand you want to get more tractors. Leave that part up to you to figure that part out. But when you want to talk about complete utilization, right, we can continue to do status quo. Or
we can absolutely have that conversation. I think there's a much more in-depth conversation. I think it would require some acknowledgement of different management practices, you know, securing that mound. If we do go with a lighter weight one, making sure that it's secured when it's not in use, or, you know, not being used at all. So we can have that conversation more directly, because I think it would impact you more than most other park users. So happy to have a further conversation about that in depth. But let's reiterate these fencing options.
Sure.
So I
Yeah,
think oh, go ahead, Katie. Sorry.
No, please, if you wanted to.
So part of what we're looking at here, Steph, and I don't have my cursor, you can't see it when I try to move it around on there, but the orange fence along the edge of baseball, that's a 4-foot chain link fence, but the green line that is adjacent to it along the edge by your building and on the edge that, you know, that is ball netting. So what we're looking at there is actually having a fence and a netting system that, in order to help, you know, not have those balls come back towards your building. And then the same on the softball, looking at, I believe that's a 6-foot fence, is that right? The blue,
that's right.
also with a ball netting associated with it.
Right.
I'm not sure if that helps alleviate some of the concern stuff, but that was the thought, is that it would be a combination fence and netting.
Yeah, well, there is option 2, which actually doesn't do ball netting, but does the 10-foot fence. So if you want to, Katie, if you want to flip that, or is
Again,
it,
those are things that we could talk through, you know,
Big option.
once a decision is made about where fields are or not. That's absolutely something we could make sure that you guys are comfortable with how that fencing and netting combination worked.
no, absolutely. I mean, you know, one of the things I look at is, if you look at Clifford Park as is, where the residents are, there's netting that goes across. That certainly saves a lot of money from balls, and it saves a lot of windows, right? A 10-foot fence is nice, but what happens if a ball goes 11 feet? Like it is what it is. So, you know, again, just being mindful of netting from, you know, just as the residents have their, you know, their properties, we're also building owners at the moment. So it's like same type of situation where we don't want to necessarily be going through that maintenance.
Absolutely. And I know that, you know, when we were walking around a couple of weeks ago, or it felt like a couple of weeks ago, I know that you guys had a broken window back there. So I know it's a real concern.
There are also, you know, I think this is a first draft at where some of the netting could go. I think we would want to run some, on the final field configuration, run some ball trajectories and make sure that we're getting, you know, 95% of the balls, you know, or whatever threshold we're comfortable with. I don't think there's a scenario where we're able to get them all the time. You may have some, you know, a stray, you know, pop up, go up over that netting. That's certainly not unheard of. That may hit your roof, but I don't think you get any of those like direct, you know, line drives straight to a window. I think it would protect the building against those line drives, those foul line drives coming into a window. Might still hit the roof, but hopefully you don't have your lost skylights. I don't know.
Well, I did just want to say thank you guys all again for tonight and all of this input. And I just want to acknowledge we've got about 5 minutes left, but I'm happy to continue chatting if anybody wanted to jump back to any of the things we talked about. But I did want to just remind everybody that we do have another meeting in person to cover these same topics this Saturday. It's going to be across from Clifford at 1010 Mass Ave. It's going to be 10 a.m. this Saturday. And we're going to be showing these same slides again and gathering even more feedback from people who couldn't come tonight. So feel free to join us then as well, or feel free to email any comments that you have. But I did just want to say thank you again and make sure that we respected everybody's time. So please let us know if you guys have any other questions while we're here. Wonderful. I don't see anybody. So thank you all again. Very much appreciate all of your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.